You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Happy Wednesday evening, folks. Welcome to my program. This is Scotty Roberts, and you're listening to and watching the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Come on over, see all the goodness that's Odyssey Radio. At the same time, you can tune in to the live video simulcast of this show over on my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts, and join the live chat room of fellow Intrepids that's going on right now over there on the YouTube channel. So I want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank you for taking your time. It always means a lot to me that you would take your time to spend an hour with me in the evening, listen to the things I have to say, both here and on the audio version of this show. Boy, I don't know what else to say other than thank you, and I appreciate that very much. We've got a new shirt up today, by the way, over on my Etsy page. If you go to Etsy, etsy.com/shop/son of a patriot, that's this little logo that you see right here behind my microphone. There it is, if you're looking on the video. And it's scrolling in the scroll bar in there. You'll see the actual link over there. You're going to see all the t-shirts I design. They're actually graphics and illustrations that I do, and I end up putting them on shirts. You've got shirts and hoodies and all of that great stuff. And I just did one last night after the first presidential debate between Donald Trump, the president, and the presidential contender Joe Biden. And I took a quote of Biden's, and I put it on a shirt. Keep yammering, man. After calling the president a clown 3 times, and telling him to shut up a couple of other times, and then he threw out the line, keep yammering, man. It's this type of thing that gets missed out there in the press and in the public discourse when they are saying that Trump was being a bully last night. And so I put that on a shirt. And now maybe you might say, well, that's just Joe's reaction to what Donald Trump was doing in being a bully. Well, I can tell you something about last night, as I'm talking about this shirt, is that the debate last night was anything but a bullying session. What you had, really, if you wanted to put it in a bullying type of... I heard somebody say it was like being a bully out on the playground. That's how they were describing Trump. I said, au contraire. I said, what I saw was 2 leaders of rival gangs out trying to duke it out on the playground or out behind the gymnasium after school. And they both came to the fight with their pipes and their switchblades. Now I'm hailing back, of course, to a long time ago when you looked at schoolyard brawls. It was a brawl between 2 guys. And while Trump may have interrupted, so did Joe. While Trump may have interrupted more, it doesn't matter. Joe said things about the president that were blatantly untrue. And so, without getting into dissecting it, we've already done that on Rocky's show a bit tonight, I do want to point out the fact that it was, in my estimation, less than presidential stuff, but it was great political theater. And as far as Joe Biden is concerned, I said to my wife, Rainey, very early on, in the first couple of minutes when Joe came out and started talking, I said, just look at his eyes and look at his face. I said, he does not look, he looks a little vacant, like a man who's not there. This is just a take, not a criticism of his politics or what party he represents. I said, this guy looks like an old man who is not in as touch as he ought to be doing what he's doing. Now, he did hold his own last night. That's fine. And that's very telling that even his own party heaved a sigh of relief after the debate last night and this morning. Whew! Joe made it. He made it. He made it through. You know what? If that was the view of my candidate in a presidential debate, was that I was just relieved that he made it through the debate, that's very telling of what they feel about their own candidate. So all of these things aside, I'm critiquing it only from a political theatrical perspective, in that no one was bullied out there last night. Trump can't bully Joe Biden. Joe Biden could bully Trump just as easily. And you know how he did that last night? Just look at the things he said. He hailed back to issues that were old, worn out, totally debunked, Trump tropes, if you will. And things like talking about Charlottesville, where Trump said, I believe there were very good people on both sides. That was 3 years ago. That's already been so dissected and gone over. If anybody doesn't understand and doesn't know what Trump actually said there, and that it had nothing to do with supporting white supremacy, then you are deliberately not looking. Because the information is there. All you have to do is go back and play the clip of what Trump said. The entire clip. And you'll know exactly what was being said there. It was nothing about supporting white supremacy. And if you don't know what he was actually saying, I'm not going to repeat it again here. I've repeated it so many times ad infinitum. It's there for you to look at. And for Joe Biden to use Charlottesville and what Trump said there as a way to try to convince people watching that Trump was some kind of racist, then Joe Biden is either doing one of two things. He's either lying through his teeth because he knows what Trump actually said, and he's just using what people think Trump said in order to gin them up about the topic, or he hasn't looked at it at all, and he has no idea what Trump actually said. So, anyway, moving on from that. So my view on the debate last night is that it was good. It was exciting. And it was fiery political theater. And so I don't come out of it going, oh my gosh, my candidate was so tough on the other guy. Or, oh, Biden was such a loser, or Trump was such a winner, or vice versa. Doesn't matter. The debate about being presidential, or is the debate about talking about shit, which is exactly what they did last night. And some people said, there's so much at stake, though. They should have done blah, blah, blah ad infinitum. We already all know what's at stake. We just wanted to see how the two candidates were going to interact with each other. They weren't there. Debates aren't there to resolve problems. They're there for people to see how these people debate each other and talk to each other. And you could see, there was a lot to see last night. If you didn't see it, go review it. And all of that led me to kind of looking at a couple of things. I wanted to talk about the psychology of politics and things like that. Without being political and talking about politics on this show, which I strive and go out of my way to say we don't do. The most politics you'll ever get on this show is what I just said over the last 10 minutes, 8 minutes, 6 minutes, whatever it was. We're only 8.5 minutes into the show, so the last 5.5 to 6 minutes is about as all you'll get in an hour of me out of about politics in general. But without talking about politics or promoting one candidate over the other, I think it's sometimes important to look at current events. It's sometimes important to look at what I was looking for this morning, the psychology behind political events. And you know what? I went to the very popular Psychology Today. It's a magazine that's out there, and they've got their own website. And I wanted to see what they had to say about this topic of politics, the psychology of politics, the psychology of oppositional, adversarial politics. I want to see what drives us as people to want to be on a side and things like that. And I saw this article, and it must have been written, it was written today, already posted this morning, how Biden can beat Trump in the era of tribal politic, and subtitled An Evolutionary Psychology Perspective on Presidential Debates. And no, it really wasn't a psychological perspective on presidential debates. It was this author, Erich Javanbacht, Javanbacht, it's almost as hard as some of the ancient names I pronounce. He wrote a book, The Many Faces of Anxiety and Trauma, and but he's not writing about. an evolutionary psychology perspective on presidential debates, he was writing about what a bad guy Trump is to vote for and housing it in this. And this is what I've seen, even at Psychology Today. I've seen more and more and more articles that are anti-Trump, and I have yet to see one that is positive Trump. And people bury it in topics that they talk about. They're anti-Trumpism. It's widespread. I'd like to see an article done at Psychology Today on the psychology of psychologists who write anti-Trump articles. But he's talking about fear and anger and tribal politics, Trump's genius of manipulating the tribal instincts, which is, he calls, the bully alpha. The bully alpha. And then he talks about why Biden should be better, the nurturing alpha, and how Biden can do it was one of his subheaders toward the end of the article, knowing bullies game rules. So you can see where he was going. Spelled out Trump as the bully, Biden as the nurturer, and how Trump can win is by knowing how the bully works. And he ends by saying this: I'm not an expert in politics, but in my view, Biden has an excellent shot at winning this election. While Trump is the vicious alpha, Biden is the empathic, nurturing alpha Americans desperately need. So, in essence, what he's concluded, Trump is the vicious bully alpha, and Biden is the empathetic, nurturing alpha. And so, you feel better already knowing that? Remember last night, Biden said, I am the Democratic Party. I am. Trump is. I remember the old, first time I saw this in the movies, and it still sticks in my head, when Kevin Costner played Robin Hood. Those of you who might be British or Irish, if Niall's here, or anybody from over in Great Britain or Ireland or Scotland, you look at Kevin Costner and Oki playing Robin Hood, who didn't even work very hard at the accent. And while the movie was fun and exciting for 1992, it was also a movie that didn't present the best Robin Hood actor. There were a lot of other people that could have played Robin Hood a lot better than Kevin Costner. But you remember part of the marketing campaign? Kevin Costner is Robin Hood. So Joe Biden is the Democratic Party. How do you Democrats feel about that? Joe Biden is your party, but he is empathetic. He's the one that will hug you and love you and make you his very own. I don't see that in Joe Biden. That's my personal take. I think he was a nice guy. I think now he's a nice grandfatherly type who needs to retire. Out of my empathy for him, get him out of politics, get him out of this position. He doesn't need to be president. I don't think he can pull it off. And he's not going to if he's elected. Somebody else is going to do that for him. There's a whole topic right there. I think the Democrats could have chosen somebody a lot better for their party. There'd be a lot less talk about this kind of thing if the Democrats had chosen better. And they had quite a big pool. Moving on from that, because that's getting too political for even my liking. But there you go. You got even Psychology Today pushing that Joe Biden's the emotional president, the one, the empathetic one, and while Trump's the bully. This is the narrative we're being fed. And so I wanted to talk about and think about this whole thing of narratives and what the heck we're looking at out there in narratives. And I ran across this article by Matt Taibbi. I don't know, Keeb is a name for an organization that he's linked with. Matt Taibbi, and called Year Zero. And I read through this article and I found some really salient points, and I want to present some of this information to you. And he wrote this article on the 4th of July. And he kind of subtitled this article something like, on America's birthday, we're celebrating the corporate sponsored revolution. And on the 4th of July, revolution is in the air. We have the fireworks going off representing the bombs that that were going off over, the Star-Spangled Banner. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light how so proudly we hail at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, o'er the ramparts we watched. See, I forget the words when I'm not singing it. O'er the ramparts we watched. I got to start it from the beginning. I know the words. Trust me, I've sung the song 1,000 times. But reciting it without singing it, you start to lose track of it. But they talk about how the bombs burst in air. This is the 4th of July. This is why we do that with fireworks. And only in America would it look like this. Get this now. An elite-sponsored Maoist revolt, couched as a black liberation movement whose canonical texts are a corporate consultant's white guilt self-help manual, and a New York Times series rewriting history to explain an election they called wrong. Remember this Project 1619 that the New York Times came out with a year ago, and recently, conveniently, quietly kind of rewrote the descriptive mission statement of Project 1619 when they found that their premise was all wrong. And this is what was out there around the 4th of July last year, a year ago. And it applies even to today, even this last 4th of July, Independence Day, we call it for those of you who don't live in this country. Much of America has watched in this quizzical silence in recent months as crowds have declared war on an increasingly incoherent succession of historical symbols. Maybe you nodded your approval as Confederate General Albert Pike was toppled, or even when Christopher Columbus's statue was beheaded by these mobs. But it got a little weird when George Washington was emblazoned with "fuck cops" and set on fire. Or when they went after Ulysses S. Grant, abolitionist Colonel Hans Christian Haig. Forward, a 7-foot-tall female figure meant to symbolize progress, the Portland, Oregon elk statue, or the statue of former slave Miguel de Cervantes, whose cheerful creations Don Quixote and Sancho Panza were apparently mistaken for real and had their eyes lashed red in San Francisco. You remember all that stuff when it was happening? Still happening. Was a what the fuck too much to ask at that time? Now? It was. In the space of a few weeks, the level of discourse in the news media dropped so low, the fear of being shamed as a divisionist was so high that most of the weirder incidents went uncovered by the news. They didn't want to talk about them. Leading press organs engaged in real-time Soviet-style airbrushing. Here's how the Washington Post described a movement that targeted the Spanish missionary Junipero Serra. Abraham Lincoln, a single-handed symbol of white supremacy, according to UW-Madison students. An apple cider press sculpture, abolitionist Matthias Baldwin, and the first all-black volunteer regiment in the Civil War, among others. They wrote them all off this way in the New York Post. Across the country, protesters have toppled statues of figures from America's sordid past, including Confederate generals, as part of demonstrations against racism and police violence. The New York Times, once the dictionary definition of unprovocative, suddenly reads like Pol Pot's sayings of Ankar. Heading into the 4th of July weekend, the morning read for upscale white Manhattanites was denouncing Mount Rushmore, urging black America to arm itself, and repositioning America alongside more deserving historical parallels in a feature about caste systems that stated this: throughout human history, 3 caste systems have stood out. The lingering millenniums-long caste system of India, the tragically accelerated, chilling, and officially vanquished caste system of Nazi Germany, and the shape-shifting, unspoken, race-based caste pyramid in the United States. So according to the New York Post wrote this, throughout human history, there's only 3 caste systems that have stood out. The one in India, the one in Nazi Germany, and the one that's left unspoken, the race-based caste pyramid in the United States. Now, it's tragic that this even needs saying, but the sudden reinvention in the press of modern America as a Nazi apartheid state is as phony as the thousands of patriotic campaigns that occupied the news media previously. We're witnessing an obscene malfunction of the elite messaging system. The people who run this country have run out of workable myths for us. Workable myths with which to distract the public's attention. And in a moment of extreme crisis, they've chosen to stoke civil war and to defame the rest of us, black and white, rather than to admit to a generation of corruption, betrayal, and mismanagement. I saw the first hints of this crack-up in the panicked conversations of campaign reporters 4 years ago. Colleagues in the news media had always reveled in the power to police the boundaries of national politics. That's how they saw themselves. Former ABC reporter Mark Halperin used to cheerfully refer to a handful of pollsters, pundits, and polls he called the Gang of 500, who set the political agenda for the country. And people like Halperin wrote glowing, self-referential exposés every 4 years about the power of their bullshit. If they told Americans a presidential race would be decided by angry soccer moms because Bill Clinton was talking up zero tolerance for school truancy and a return to school uniforms, then it was so. If 8 years later the deciders were security moms, because what mattered then was not schools or participation or prescription drugs, but what are you doing to protect my kids from terrorists, then that was so. If they said voters cared most of all to know which multi-millionaire candidate was a better potential beer-drinking companion because a person is smart, but people are dumb, as one pundit put it, then that was to be taken seriously as also. So, unfortunately, voters had all kinds of other problems. And by 2016, Americans had lived for a generation now, roughly 40 years, under an economic model dominated by huge transitional companies, transnational companies, that sold weapons into holocausts of urban violence, rejoiced in addiction to opiates or carcinogens as a revenue model. They bled virtually all of the savings of the American middle class, targeting minorities especially, through a succession of speculative bubble schemes, frequently lobbied to be exempted from taxes, environmental laws, criminal penalties, and even their own business errors, through bailouts approved by politicians they sponsored in both parties. And we got to continue this when we come back, because we got to go out to break now. So you guys sit tight. We're going to be right back with more of this riveting expose on America. Stay tuned.
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad, so he can take me to Disneyland.
All right, gang, thanks for sitting on through that break. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to my show, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Come on over, see all the goodness that's Odyssey Radio. Check out all the places where you can find this show. And if you look at the graphic, if you're watching the video, you've seen the graphic for tonight's show, just look over here. Whoops, over here. Mirror reflection, I keep forgetting. We're on iTunes, we're on iHeartRadio, we're on Spreaker, and you can find us at Odyssey Radio and find all the links to those different places, your favorite place to listen to a podcast. And also at the same time, you can come on over to my YouTube channel and watch the video simulcast of this show. That's over at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. And at the same time, join the chat room. Inhabited, I was going to say infested, inhabited, however you want to look at it, with other Intrepids that are talking up a storm right now. So let's get back into talking about this position we're finding America in, and it's more about the way certain elements in America want you to view America. There's something that's very dire, especially to me, in all of this. And that is that we have people that so want to win power in this country that they are willing to rewrite our history to reflect the worst elements of who we are, and say that America is not what America was founded to be. And I have a problem with that. Now, you know me. I've got my eyes wide open when it comes to history. When we just went through this whole series on Native America, you can see the way I view history in this country. America is not a perfect place, but America is also a place where we strive to be better than we have been. When we make mistakes, we strive to improve from those. And so the concessions to civilization employers, as we left off with, had once, under great pressure, agreed to provide pensions, medical insurance, sick leave, the 40-hour work week. This all vanished as the manufacturing economy was exported into a snap to unfree labor zones like China and Indonesia. And both parties supported the deals American business made with monster states out there. U.S. Customs seized 13 tons of human hair farmed from the heads of Uyghur political prisoners in Chinese labor camps. We gave that country a most favored nation trading status eons ago. Only Nixon could go to China. And so what's interesting is that by 2016, as we mentioned already, and I want to reemphasize this point, Americans had lived for a generation already under an economic model dominated by huge transnational companies that sold weapons in a holocaust of urban violence, rejoiced in addiction to opiates or carcinogens as a revenue model. They bled virtually all the savings of the American middle class, targeting minorities especially, through this whole succession of speculative bubble schemes, relentlessly lobbied to be exempted from taxes, environmental laws, criminal penalties, and even their own business errors through bailouts approved by the politicians that these corporations and companies sponsored in both parties. It was trans party support was being given out there. I watched for election cycle after election cycle as politicians and press lackeys alike promised lives would improve with middle-class tax cuts, service for college grants, federal retraining programs, and an endless succession of proposals to cut all the red tape and run America like a business. Remember, by the time Trump came along, Americans were clamoring for politicians who weren't politically experienced. They wanted a businessman to run the country. We need a businessman running this country. And so we voted one in. But through the election of Barack Obama, maybe there was patience for this. But within a few years after the crash of 2008, people just stopped believing. All the press was saying, this was Bush's fault when Obama had the crash of 2008. And, actually, Obama was elected at the end of 2008, so this crash, people had it. They stopped believing. And when the protest movements popped up on both the left and the right, ordinary people who were mad about everything from crushing consumer and student debt to unpunished financial fraud to pointless war to surveillance to bailouts to stolen pensions to, yes, police brutality, the first reaction of donor-fattened polls was to blow off all the warning signs. They controlled both parties. What was the worst that could happen? So the things we're hearing about today aren't new news. This was 12 years ago we were hearing about this stuff. And when the election of Trump made a solid first attempt at answering that question, establishment figures howled in self-pity and outrage. Who but deplorable racists could hate us this much? Those were the first gusts hinting at the current hurricane of stupidity. About those deplorables, quote unquote, the popular theory that drove the Trump campaign was not obviously rooted in concern over police brutality. And just as obviously, Trump was using gross racial rhetoric to drum up support. And there's been a lot written about this, even if you support Trump. Trump was using what could be categorized as a gross racial rhetoric. And he used this to drum up support because he was anti the overt racist talk. But he did stress other themes. In hunger to suck up discontent or every stripe of candidate, Trump complained about everything from the antitrust exemption for insurance companies. The lines around the states prevented competition, he said, half coherently, to the obsolete mission of NATO, to nation building abroad. He pledged instead to build the roads and the highways and the bridges and the tunnels, the airports and the railways of tomorrow at home, and to NAFTA, to the Fed, to, yes, the most favored nation status for China. So he spoke to all of those things. And in Trump crowds, one frequently heard people talking about being willing to try anything as long as it didn't come from a politician. A term which by 2016 had become synonymous with politician, became synonymous with paid liar. Now, of course, Trump, let's admit it, folks, whether you voted for him and support him or not, Trump was a bit of a liar too, but at least he was his own liar, which in a testament to the level of pessimism gripping the country by 2016 was an important distinction to some. He may have built up himself a little bit. When I see these lists of Trump to date has told over 14,000 lies, What a bunch of B as in bull and S as in shit. That's bullshit. Because the kinds of things that people say he lied about are ranging from misspeaks to saying the sky was cloudy when it was actually blue, to partly cloudy to partly sunny. I'm being a little facetious with that one. This is the testament to the pessimism of our country. But Trump proved almost completely insincere with respect to all of these policy complaints. He mentioned them, but I don't think he was sincere to them. But it was amazing to watch the speed with which it became consensus that Trump's entire platform had only been a promise to restore the power of white identity. It became taboo even to say something as tame as Trump sold fake solutions to real problems. Even that was too near the truth. So papers like the New York Times did these post-mortems, citing research that concluded things like how trade affected personal finances had little bearing on political preferences. See, even reading that line, you go, what? How trade affected personal finances had little bearing on political preferences. While unemployment or the density of manufacturing jobs in one's area were similarly irrelevant. The same pundits who claimed, it's the economy, stupid, throughout the 90s kind of reversed their tunes. So Trump in 2015, 2016, he wasn't the only politician that was complaining about a broken system. Millions of Americans were giving up on the political process because they understand the economy is rigged. Bernie Sanders even said that early in 2016, using nearly the same language as Trump. The economy is rigged. It was one thing when Donald Trump's campaign was denounced as racist, but as far as back as the 2016 primaries, when the Clinton campaign began adopting the language of critical theory to denounce Sanders and the Bernie bros, we started to hear that protests coming from the left were also a white grievance campaign. And this is the stuff that really starts to grate on me, not just because I'm a white guy, but because now I'm supposed to feel some sort of guilt for being Caucasian, for having Welsh and Scottish roots. So campaign reporters chuckled at first at this, and they remembered 2008, when pictures of then Clinton opponent Barack Obama in Somali garb mysteriously circulated during the primary season. They also recalled Hillary's Pat Buchanan-esque transformation that a year into a white working class champion that year into a white working class champion who scoffed at Dr. King's dream. It took a president to get it done, Hillary Clinton huffed. And she won Pennsylvania, taking up her lace factory worker granddad, talking him all up, while insisting, I was raised on pinochle and the American dream. So are reporters really supposed to take seriously whispers from this politician? That the training wheel FDR socialism of Bernie Sanders was a dangerous white identitarian movement? That's what the Hillary Clinton campaign was pushing. Apparently, yes. Identity politics became the Democrats' magic incantations for wiping out structural critiques. Their hachar, if you've been listening to the recent shows of politics. If we broke up the banks tomorrow, Hillary asked in 2016, would that end racism? That was her question. Look at how her tune has even changed. Because it works now for their base. Though meaningless, if you thought about it for just a fraction of a second, a lot of things very worth doing won't end racism. In the moment, it was a zinger that helped cast Sanders as a man divorced from the real business of American progressivism. And the press from January 2017 on presented a basically unbroken succession of terrors and manias, whose purpose was the psychological expunging of the insult to aristocratic America that was Trump's Napoleonic occupation of the White House. Everything was a maximum level emergency. When Trump was too chummy with Putin in Helsinki, it was literal treason. And we're still hearing that today. An historic moment in the entire history of the United States was the redundant gasp of Thomas Friedman. The administration's admittedly grotesque decision to expand separations of detained immigrant children from their parents, a policy not terribly far off from that of George Bush or Barack Obama, but still became Trump's concentration camps. You remember all that bullshit? Trump's phone call to the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky was an attack on democracy itself. Listen to the utter hubris of the writers, while at the same time, what do you call that when you expand something from nothing into something big? The bloviation of these things. Trump's phone call to Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky was an attack on democracy itself? Of course, that's what Trump is all about, right? He's all about attacking democracy. Why? Because he wants to be your dictator. That's the rhetoric. So in this reporting era, a cigar was never just a cigar, like Freud said. All things had to be unthinkable historical evils. I almost said evils. Because evil's just evil, but evil is the evilest of evils. So by the accident of a leak, we know exactly how the New York Times perceived its mission during the Trump years, when Slate published a taped transcript of a New York Times town hall captioned by editor Dean Baquet, or Baquet if you want to pronounce it that way. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Baquet, B-A-Q-U-E-T. Dean Bouquet. We learned the paper in the early Trump years built their newsroom to cover one story. In other words, the Trump-Russia scandal was all the New York Times built their newsroom around. And unfortunately, by the summer of 2019, Bouquet told the troops circumstances that story had been mined dry, demanding a shift to a more head-on story about the president's character. He said this: "The day Bob Mueller walked off that witness stand, two things happened. Our readers who want Donald Trump to go away suddenly thought, holy shit, Bob Mueller's not going to be able to do it. But fear not, there was this new story they could run that could be palatable to those readers who wanted Donald Trump to go away." Bouquet announced, "This week we will publish the 1619 Project, the most ambitious examination of the legacy of slavery ever undertaken in newspaper, to try to understand the forces that led to the election of Donald Trump." It started in 1619, folks, the forces that led to the election of Donald Trump. So I'm not talking about an apologetic for President Trump here. I'm talking about the things that have degraded America. And a lot of these have really come out to the fore because of the movement that doesn't want Trump in office. Jake Silverstein, the editor for 1619, the writer is Nicole Hannah-Jones, who was part of Black Lives Matter organization, argued in a piece explaining the project that literally everything exceptional about America grew out of slavery, the country's very origin. He said this, Jake Silverstein: "Out of slavery and the anti-black racism it required grew nearly everything that has truly made America exceptional. Its economic might, its industrial power, its electoral system, its diet, and even its popular music. This all came out of slavery and the anti-black racism movement. So Hannah Jones made an extraordinary case. Here's what she said: the American Revolution was not a project to oppose a despotic king and install a durable system of democratic government. Instead, Thomas Jefferson and all of those slave-owning revolutionaries only broke off from England because, quote, she said, independence was required in order to ensure that slavery would continue, end quote. The revolution in this conception was a wordy, elaborate lie enacted by slave-holding intellectuals who were afraid that Britain might soon outlaw the institution that made them rich. Get that? The American Revolution wasn't about bringing democracy, bringing freedom and liberty to be democratic, while breaking from a tyrannical, despotic king. That's not what the revolution was about. According to Hannah Jones and those who support her in the BLM movement that she helped create, America is something very different. It wasn't a project to oppose the king. It was a project that had all those slave-owning revolutionaries breaking off from England because independence was required in order to ensure that slavery would continue, an institution that made them all rich. So it's impossible to disentangle this profoundly negativistic portrait of the American experiment from the admitted context of the 1619 Project, an effort by the nation's leading elite media organ to explain the Democratic Party's loss to Trump. Would this have been published if Hillary Clinton had won the White House? Would the Project 1619 been published? As journalism, the 1619 Project read almost exactly like the papers and postmortems on the 2016 election, just like the New York Times postmortems. Probably not an accident, since Beckett told us it was conceived identically as an effort to, quote, understand the forces that led to the election of Donald Trump, end quote. So in both cases, history was reduced to the simplistic showdown between evil racists and oppressed peoples. Now you tell me, looking at America today, the race wars that are going on, you tell me that that wasn't a successful tack that they took. And you know, the 1619 Project was fact-checked. It got schooled. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. The New York Times tries to rewrite U.S. history, but its falsehoods are exposed by surprising sources. And this is why the New York Times earlier this month, had to retract and edit. Without saying much about it at all, they quietly edited the mission statement and the opening lines of the Project 1699 site. And it's so wrong in so many ways, this Project 1699. This is how Gordon Wood, the Pulitzer Prize-winning historian of the American Revolution, characterized the New York Times 1619 Project. James McPherson, Dean of the Civil War Historians and other Pulitzer winner, said the Times presented an unbalanced, one-side account. Sorry, I've got my phone ringing and I forgot to turn it off. Presented an unbalanced, one-sided account that left most of the history out. Even more surprising than the criticism from these generally liberal historians was where the interviews appeared on the World Socialist Web Site, run by the Trotskyist Socialist Equality Party. The 1619 project was launched in August of last year with a 100-page spread in the Times Sunday magazine that intends to reframe our country's history by crossing out 1776 as America's founding date and substituting 1619, the year 20 or so African slaves were brought to Jamestown, Virginia. And the project has been celebrated up and down the liberal establishment, praised by, of all people, Senator Kamala Harris and Mayor Pete Buttigieg. I've got to bring up those names because they were both running for president. Now Kamala Harris is named as Joe Biden's vice presidential running mate. And so a September essay for the World Socialist Web Site called The Project, a Racist Falsification of History. And that didn't get much attention, but in November of last year, the interviews with the historians went viral. I wish my books would have this kind of reaction, Mr. Woods says in an email. It still strikes me as amazing why the New York Times would put its authority behind a project that has such weak scholarly support. And he added that fellow historians have privately expressed their agreement. Mr. McPherson coolly describes the 1619 project's implicit position that there have never been any good white people, thereby ignoring white radicals and even liberals who supported racial equality. So the project's creator, Nicole Hannah-Jones, is proud that it decenters whiteness and disdains its critics as old white male historians. That's all you've got to do anymore, is talk about the white racism that exists, the systemic racism. So Trump broke the brains of America's educated classes, like Russian aristocrats who spent the last days of the Tsarist Empire flocking to fortune tellers and mystics, and upscale blue staters have lost themselves lately in quasi-religious tracts like white fragility, and they're lining up to flog themselves for personal and historical sins. Oh, I'm so sad I'm white. Oh, the abuses my people have brought to the rest of our brown-skinned brothers and sisters. So they flog themselves. They flagellate. I always confuse that with flatulate. Maybe they can both be used the same way. So in desperation to help the country atone for their ideas of why Trump happened, because Trump, they've engaged in a sort of moon landing of anti-intellectual endeavors, committing this generation of minds to finding a solution to the one thing no thinking person ever considered a problem, and that's the Enlightenment ideas that led to the American Revolution. The same Poles and pundits who not long ago were waving the flag for wars and insisting that American-style democracy was so perfectly realized that it made sense to bring it to all the peoples of the world by force if needed. Think of Friedman's hypothesis of the borderless utopia of forced wealth creation called the Golden Straitjacket. And they've now reversed course to tell us our entire history needs to be wiped clean. Everything is a lie now. CNN even put independence, the word independence, in quotes when describing our holiday, the Independence Day. Their article was called Re-Examining Independence Day. Now, this revolution will end with a Wolf Blitzer pulling a switch to dynamite the Statue of Liberty. Even if America is the idea whose time is past, which I don't think it is, I doubt it deserves an ending this absolutely ridiculous. And I gotta end there. There's more to say. But I'm going to close on this. When candidate Obama visited Mount Rushmore in 2008, CNN called the monument majestic. When Michelle Obama visited Mount Rushmore in 2013, she called it a great sight, and CNN reported her statement objectively. When candidate Bernie Sanders visited Mount Rushmore in 2016, CNN again called the monument majestic. When Trump visited Mount Rushmore, it had become, according to CNN reporter, a monument to 2 slaveholders built on stolen Indian land. That's how things work nowadays, folks. That's all we got. We're going to be back tomorrow. Sit tight. Think about these things. I'll see you tomorrow.